Hello, everybody. I hope you have been enjoying Mystic Week. I'm joined with Daniel from Quick Learner. How's it going?
Good. I'm enjoying Mystic Week too.
Yay. Actually, the first video of Mystic Week went out this morning. We're recording this on the 17th, so
And I've watched it, so.
Oh yeah. Did you have a good time? Yearbook video?
Yeah. It was good.
So with this one, we're actually doing something that I am not the biggest fan of the Mystic class. I think I even said this in the Yearbook video where they are my favorite class to play like in 3 or 4 players. Like they become very fun. But in 2-player, they are kind of a grind.
We even played 2-player, both of us playing Mystic recently, and it did not turn out well.
Yeah, I remember I even said when we started, I was like, we're going to have troubles with this because we're 2 Mystics having to get through this. And turns out I still might know something about Arkham, and it turned out that way. With that said, though, with both Eric's video, which is coming out, it's already out. It's already out on the channel. I have to remember YouTube time. And this video, I actually made some good discoveries about the Mystic class and why they made me think that way. So this was a kind of a video to help challenge the notion that every Mystic deck is the same. And this is something that is said in a lot of Arkham communities. I've seen it said in our Arkham community. And there are a few people that jump at this statement and say, this is a Mystic problem. Some people say, no, this is a you problem. This is a deck building problem. So I thought this would be a great thing to focus on in Mystic Week and tackle the notion if every Mystic deck is the same. So, Daniel, I'm going to throw this to you for the first of our 3 points that we have about this. How true is this statement, do you think?
Yeah. So I can give the coward response is it's as true as you want it to be.
Yeah.
So, I mean, deck building is deck building, right? You have the choice of what to put into your decks, and if you want to put the same 15 cards in your deck every time, then my goodness, yes, every Mystic deck is going to be the same. But I will pull back on that a little bit and say that even among the choices that you have among the cards, they do start to feel a little samey because the kinds of things Mystics accomplish and the way that they accomplish them are more similar, I think, than other classes in that same vein. And I think that there's a lot of design questions that we'll get into about why that is true. It's not just the staples, right? It can be some of the newer cards too have a design philosophy behind them that feels like, hey, we've seen these kinds of cards before. So it's tough to add in new versions of Mystic, and we'll talk about that more, I think, too. So I've seen Mystic decks that are, you know, all very similar to each other, and you kind of feel like, hey, I better put in these cards because they're good and they work in almost every Mystic. But sometimes it's more fun to branch out and try something else.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do think that this statement is generally more true than it is false, but I don't think it's because of taking the question literally. I don't think every Mystic deck is the exact same, like 20 cards anymore. Maybe earlier on, there was the thing where it's like, okay, I need my Shriveling, I need my Rite of Seeking, I need my Ward of Protection, I need my Holy Rosary, I need my Arcane Initiate, I need my David Renfield, right? But I think that it's a true statement in the feeling where your spell assets, is there a lot of deviation between them, or are they all kind of just the same thing? So I think that, while I don't agree with the statement, I agree with like the idea behind the statement. So why is this statement so common? So I started to touch on it, and let's start with the spell asset suites, because I think that this is one of the big reasons why, at least starting out, why Mystics felt so similar. And that was because you only had Shriveling, and then when Dunwich came out, Rite of Seeking, to be able to reliably do things, which meant that every Mystic wanted to include those cards in their deck because they were key in ensuring functionality. This was made even harder by level 0 Shriveling and level 0 Rite of Seeking not giving any brain boost, because the idea behind those cards was that your brain, using your brain was the benefit. Like, if this was a fight, if this was just like using your fist, you would only get like, you maybe get a +1 boost. But because you're using your brain and you're Agnes Baker, you're getting a +2 boost. So that's actually pretty good for level 0 card. But then the problem came where I now have to fight something with 4 and I only have 5. So I should probably run Holy Rosary because it gives me 6, which is a much more comfortable number for fighting 4 attack bosses. And then it was like, well, there's not many cards to begin with, so I'll put in some Ward of Protection to keep me safe. But the spell assets are kind of like the issue for this. And I think it actually starts at level 0. And then as we get further on, we're going to see how like this goes even further, where the spell assets and how they were divvied up from expansions also created issues.
Mm-hmm. Is this a good time to talk about like the Mystic design in general too? I think that the numbers, right, that you talk about Agnes having 5 in one number and 2 in the others, well, 3 agility, but you can't do anything with those other numbers, right? The whole pitch for Mystic is you get to do everything with your one good number, whether it's investigating, it's fighting, it's evading, it's using that to protect yourself from Mythos. Like, that's the whole point. And the way to do that is to use your spells, and that's how Mystics above all get their action compression acceleration, right? They don't get anything else like a deduction or vicious blow like the other classes. So the core set, I mean, what did they give in terms of the skills for Mystics? You got Fearless, and that was upgraded in Dunwich. Whereas Deduction got level 2, Vicious Blow got level 2. So for the other classes, you're doing a lot more stuff with those real numbers. And you didn't get that even with Willpower. You had to use your assets to do the action compression. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like the design, I suppose. But you have to rely on drawing those cards and playing them first. And that's the class. I mean, I hate to say anything more than that, but as far as like events go, right, you got Drawn to the Flame in the core set for getting clues, extra clues. I don't think we got a damage spell other than, I guess, Blinding Light, if you want to count that.
Yeah.
And there's not even any other clue-getting spells or events, period, in Mystic to this day other than Read the Signs, and if you want to count String of Curses. That's it. Every other class has tons of stuff.
And it's actually kind of really funny that you say this, because it's crazy how it works, because there hasn't been like a 4-fist Mystic, but there's been a lot of 4-book Mystics. It means that even though, because I did the same thing when I was building the decks for this, I was like, what are all the investigate options I have in Mystic? And I was like, oh, like I have like 2 cards that aren't banned, right? But I still play so many Clover Mystics because having 4-book means that I can get clues when I don't have to use my spell assets. And I think that this is ultimately, a lot of the Mystic issues stem from the fact that in the core set design, I think they were kind of just put into a bad place. I think the idea of using your brain for everything is a cool idea, but like you said, it has its own set of huge problems that can stem from this. And if Agnes Baker had a stat line that was, let's just say, closer to Roland Banks, for example, like maybe she was only 4 brain, but had 3 fist, and every other Mystic card was designed around this idea that we weren't going to give everybody 5 brain, maybe the class would have been able to kind of like get out of that a little bit better. Because it's actually another thing that happens with Mystics, where people say, and by people I'm pointing at PBG as one of those people, that like 4 brain is harder to work around than 5 brain. And that's just because the number is lower. Like, that is just like how it is. And then that also helps to further influence this problem where every Mystic deck is the same, because I need that brain boost. I need that Crystal Pendulum. I need that Holy Rosary. I need something to help my brain get better.
We talk about Jim because he came out next.
Yeah.
And he kind of embodies that idea of maybe you could use all the numbers.
Yeah.
But then the cards that came out with him, and then of course the ones that were already out in the core set, didn't really help with that. You got Alyssa Graham, who strangely is the only one who gives you any sort of ally, who gives you any sort of boost at level 0 outside of David Renfield. Yeah. So that's like good. He could maybe investigate with his book, but that's it. All you're doing is walking around doing basic investigates.
Yeah.
That's not really what you want to do with your decks in this game.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's even like the Dunnage kind of again continue to make this problem more of a thing, and I think this was unfortunately put to its apex in the revised core, where I really wish that they just kind of bucked the trend and also put level 0 Rite of Seeking into the core set, because then they wouldn't feel obligated to print spell asset cycles in each set. I will say that this is another issue for why this statement is so common, because it feels like so much of Mystic in each cycle is the same thing. Mm-hmm. I will say they have bucked this trend in the new design team. And even in Scarlet Keys, there wasn't... Oh, no, there was. There was the asset cycle, the hand slot cycle. But the Hemlock and now Drowned City, they don't be like, okay, we need to have a level 0 and an upgraded version of our spell assets. But before this, there is so much of this game that was eaten up by that in the Mystic classes, right? Where it's just like, here are your spell assets to fill the slot when... if you buy this box first and you need to play the Mystic class, because our design philosophy for Mystic meant that this was necessary.
That's the problem, is that they shouldn't have had that as the design philosophy unless they were going to support it in the core set.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's like they've kind of maybe vacillated a bit, not sure. So Jim came out, he kind of bucks the trend, even though he actually came out with all of those spells in the first place. He had the Rite of Seeking and Shriveling. So, but he doesn't really want them. I mean, he wants them because that's all you had, but he's no better at using them than anyone else.
Yeah.
And then after that, we talked about this a bit, how Akachi came out next, and she's another 5-brain Mystic. Mateo is 4-brain, but doesn't get a whole lot of off-class stuff. And it wasn't until you get to Circle Undone that you actually got some support for the Investigator in the box outside of their Mystic class. So that was Diana, although Marie came out there too. So you've all along, it was just a bunch of Mystic stuff with the kind of similar archetype. I mean, even charges for Akachi, like, who cares? It's just more assets that have stuff on them. But you could play any of those cards in any of those Investigators. It just didn't feel special enough, and it wasn't pushing the design of the Mystic class at all.
No, I think that was the thing where it's like a lot of Mystics, just because even the nature of the Mystic design philosophy just feel like mono Mystics in a lot of ways. And that's why Travis is actually such a big fan of the Mystic O2 splash. He says it's his favorite splash. And the reason for that is because it's a very powerful splash, and you don't feel chained to the Mystic side of things because you aren't a Mystic, but you're able to take advantage of all the powerful cards that Mystics are able to use, but it's harder for them to put in because, one, the design philosophy means that you have to do all these things, but two, Mystic has another big issue, which is in the form of XP, which I think is also the reason why this statement is so common. When the Mystic class's original designs were been like, here is a level 3 version of the spell and the 5 version of the spell. You're going to get to this. Or in Rite of Seeking's case, 2 and 4, right? But then they were like, we don't have enough experience to make this work. So let's put in arcane research into Forgotten Age. But then this made it so your decks kind of became even more similar, because how could you leave all that XP on the table? And then also there was the issue now where this is going to have an issue going forward where Mystic Design is going to demand more XP because they have an XP reduction, which I'm hoping with the new change from Current isn't going to be a thing.
Yeah. I have nothing to contribute more than that. That's absolutely it. And it just sort of, you wonder kind of if was it a chicken or the egg problem what they were trying to solve here. And unfortunately, the arcane research feels like a Band-Aid and didn't actually fix the underlying problem. I'm not sure they could, right? You can't go back and fix the old cards. Sometimes I wonder if Arkham had introduced this rotating cycle or whatever it might be called in the future earlier, that this would have been fixed in some way, maybe a little bit, but it does feel like the design from the beginning probably couldn't anticipate that it was going to go for 10 years. Right?
Yes,
That
yes.
after a few years or 5 years, maybe even, they could say we've tapped out of our design space, and it makes sense for the cards that have been released, but the designers get put in a box that they can't really design themselves out of too well, because even the hand assets, the charms in Scarlet Keys, they do both work for willpower and for your real stat. They kind of had to throw that in there, but people don't like them that much.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
So even when they try to get out of this box, it's a struggle.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and when I was putting this all together, there was another thought that hit me for all this, which is, why don't the other classes get similar statements said about them?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is ragging on the Mystics. By the way, I'm going to just call it right now. I know Astute is watching this, and he's going to be like, amen when I say this. But everyone rags on the Mystics for always being the same, but why aren't people saying the same thing about all the secret decks I see, that the first things you put in are Dr. Milan Christopher, Burning the Midnight Oil, Deduction, Practice Makes Perfect ends up in there, Magnifying Glass, right? Like those things that like, or even just Guardians, right? With like, people love their beat cops, they love their weapons, their melee weapons, they love their vicious blows, but Mystic is the class that always gets ragged on for this. And do you have any thoughts for why you think that is?
Yeah. So you have that image from the first video this week, right, where you have Shriveling and Azure Flame mashed together, and it's called Shrivelame or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I think maybe the problem for Mystics is that the cards feel more similar than they do different when you get a new cycle. And yeah, there still are strong cards in other classes that you can use as staples, right? Like I'll always put in a Vicious Blow in a deck that wants to do extra damage.
Yep.
Stand Together is really good. Those are just like strong staples, right? But the other options feel like they are part of different archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
And Mystic doesn't have that in quite the same way. Like it tries. So Sixth Sense is different than Clairvoyance, but you don't have to play it different. Like it's better in a token fishing deck for sure, but sometimes people just have it as here is a thing to put down that just uses my good number and the rest of the card is irrelevant. I think even just Shriveling itself compared to Azure Flame, like these could be different decks if you care about revealing the other symbols, but we've all played draft or sealed runs where you're like, this fills the exact same spot. I'll take one or the other. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's true for the other classes. I think while there are strong cards in the other classes, they are optional because you can get by very well with other strong cards that fulfill a different, interesting archetype. I don't play Magnifying Glass all the time. I could, but you can do some really cool stuff with investigating in your hand slots without it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel necessary to run those types of cards because they don't feel quite the same. Like Grim Memoir is not the same thing as Magnifying Glass, but they do, of course, both help you investigate pretty well.
Yeah, and I think that's like a great way of putting that, of why don't other classes get similar statements said about them, is that Mystics need these things, whereas other classes want those things. And that's a big difference in terms of feeling more open in comparison. I also think another reason is just that the other classes have an easier time doing it. They are just better. They are just stronger, which means that the Mystic ones feel a little bit more chained up with their thing as opposed to the other classes, which are more open. And then also, as XP gets easier and other 5 XP or like 4 XP cards get stronger, the fantasy that was the Mystic class, which was I am the late campaign class, becomes less and less true because of that.
That's true.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
all right.
I was also thinking about this. Sorry, I was also thinking about this morning too with your video about like what are the different archetypes? Like what's the strongest archetype in Mystic, or what's the best one? And even just thinking about what they even are.
Yeah.
It's like there's the Doom one. I think that's the one y'all voted on, right? As being like the best one because it's like interesting. But we actually don't have like Doom interacting with the willpower stuff that much outside of those charms and like Blood Pact or something like that. So it feels like they're different parts of the class, and it's. I have to say, it's like I've played a Mina that still wants to use willpower. Like it feels like the Doom
Yes.
stuff was almost a failure because you still actually have the card pool that only supports the willpower stuff.
Yeah.
So,
and that's what I was saying, why like the O2 splash is so powerful, because you're not locked into that part of the class. Because even a Mina can fall prey to that. You can do other things, but she can still fall prey to those sort of things. But the archetype thing was very eye-opening for us, because with every other class, we were like, oh, it's obviously this, it's obviously this, it's obviously this. And then we're like, we actually had extras on this. With the Mystic one, we were like, I don't know, spells matter? Like, it's like, but that's like the worst idea for an archetype yet, which is just that my spells matter and I'm going to find them from my deck and play them. Like, that's kind of like where it like goes for, right?
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, like I think the idea, the conceit of you only need to concentrate on one type of thing, the willpower is going to get you to get clues and evade and fight, that is a benefit, right? Like you're losing something, I think, if you ignore that part of the class, or but I think it just becomes dull after several cycles. Like we've seen it already. So it would have been nice to see more other archetypes early to make playing a Mystic not feel like you have to do this.
Yes. Yeah. And I do think that Drowned City and Hemlock are nice attempts at diversifying the Mystic class. Will they be successful in the long term remains to be seen, right? But I do think that there's some nice cards for there. However, actually, before I do this, is there anything else you want to add, or should we move on?
Give me a 4-fist Mystic, please.
Yes, give me that. I mean, I'm going to be saying that again during Mystic Week, so I want that 4-fist Mystic. It's so huge. There's a reason why every Mystic usually ends up being a Clover, because there's no 4-fist Mystic to help get you there, and that's huge. This video, we've been talking a lot about the issues with it, but when Daniel and I both said earlier that this statement is as true as you make it, with the way the card pool is now, there is more you can do with the Mystic class than you could with a smaller card pool. I think that, like Rogues, Mystics have benefited a lot from the bigger card pool, but we don't really appreciate that benefit because we go to the idea here that every Mystic deck is the same. So, our hope for this video is to make you feel like Mystic is more open than you think. It's still gonna fall prey to all of the issues that we talked about here. That is actually, unfortunately, unavoidable, but we did try to buck the trend as much as we could in this video. But before we get into the actual decks and the bands that we're going to be doing here, I want to talk about why this might be a harder pill to swallow than someone saying, for example, a Survivor is more open than you think, So like, because a Survivor is probably the most open class that is out there. But the Mystic one, I think, is more open than you think. It can be hard to find confidence to explore alternative deck ideas. Trust me. If you have failed and faltered as a Mystic, the last thing you want to do is try something different with a Mystic. I have brought Mystic Fighters that have fumbled. I have brought Mystic Cloovers that have fumbled. And then the next time I go, I'm just like, I don't want to play a Mystic. I want to play a Seeker or a Guardian, and I just want to get the job done. And then when I go back to Mystic, I'm like, maybe I should try something new. But I'm like, yeah, but when I did the thing that worked, failed, me doing something that is new is probably going to fail as well. So I just go back to the thing that failed originally. But maybe it's actually better to try something different and explore ways that are not just the usual things. I don't need to rely on Rite of Seeking. I can explore and find better things that do the same job. In addition to Rite of Seeking, but like I don't need to just like put all my eggs in one Mystic basket.
Yeah, let me just add to this and say that the other part that is hard is to look at the card pool and look at an investigator stat line and ability and say, I'm going to not lean into that as much as possible. And this just it comes back to that deck building of, putting the same 15, 20 cards in every deck. It's like, well, if I'm putting my some of my eggs into the willpowered basket, I might as well put all of them there. I'll put the Holy Rosary in, 4 of Cups, then I might as well run Sword Cane. I might as well run, all of these spells. And that feels very hard to get away from because you're saying, but that objectively, looks like it should be the strongest thing.
Yeah, yeah. 100%. And then you auto-fail a Sword Cane, and you're like, I'm dead. But like, for example, I would never have touched I'm staying to the spell assets right now, but I never would have touched like Miss Sorella. I would always go to Sword Cane first. But then I started running Miss Sorella, and then I was like, oh, this actually helps me solve this problem right now, and I can like pace out my problem solving as opposed to missing with my Sword Cane and being like, uh-oh, like I don't know what to do here. Yeah.
It's interesting that you bring it up that way, because the problem mystics can have, maybe this is the risk reward archetype or design, is that there isn't a good backup plan in many cases for mystics, because you can't use your real stats. But we're here to show you that maybe you can, and you can put some of these cards in to have another avenue in case things go south. Because maybe you shouldn't always plan for things to go poorly, but maybe the difference between you losing the whole scenario and just like getting set back a little tiny bit is having a better backup plan.
Yeah, and actually that's a great thing to the next point, which is the Mystic class is very fragile because, like you said, they don't run backup plans. I think that's like a really good example of the Mystic risk reward philosophy. But going outside of just like going all in can lead you to discover things that will give your deck more strength. And then the last thing here as well, this is all kind of like the same sort of same kind of points following through, but the card pool is worth exploring. It's a big card pool, and yes, it's so easy to just be like build the same Mystic decks again and again and again, but it's also very big at this point now, so you might as well try some things out. Maybe ban some assets, like do what we're going to be doing, come in here and like figure out what you can do without that.
Yeah, there's hundreds of cards. You gonna let them all be filling out your binder? Like, nah, man. Like, play some of them. They're fun.
Yeah. All right, so let's demystify. We're here to showcase 4 decks. We have 4 decks for you that explore Mystic Investigators in ways that attempt to buck the every Mystic deck is the same statement. We actually also did not build these like we shared the deck list with each other, but we didn't be like, okay, you can't use this card because I'm using this card. We just like put some cards together, decks together, and I'm curious to see how much crossover there is actually between them as well. Like, does this maybe end up being a thing where there actually is a lot of crossover, or are we still actually exploring the class in different ways? To help us give us some parameters to achieve this, we have banned some Mystic cards from our deck building here. This just let us have some cards that we just thought were like the stuff that people would always put in, and we wanted to get rid of those. This includes all damage and clue spell assets. So, Shriveling, Rite of Seeking, Clairvoyance, Azure Flame, Brand of Cthugha, Divination, even though I don't think Divination probably would have, I would have liked it, but it follows the same thing. Sixth Sense, My Boy Wither, the new cards, Breath of the Dreamer and Eyes of the Dreamer, like those are all banned from this. And the main reason for that was just because they are the issue. Like, that's like the easiest thing to just start with the band here. These are the things that people always fall on first because they are rewarded so much in the Mystic class and they eat up so much of the design space in a cycle. Additionally, we also banned Holy Rosary and Crystal Pendulum for the accessory slot because, again, these things are just, you make your brain better. It's an easy thing to include. I also banned Uncage the Soul, and mostly this is because it was on the thumbnail of the video. But like it is, I think it's like less played than it was before, but Uncage the Soul 0 and the upgraded version are also still played quite a bit because they give you that consistency in your spell assets. Water protection.
I don't play it anymore myself, because I don't play it anymore myself, just because I feel like I can do something more interesting with the spot. But again, if you're just looking at it from the pure, if you have a bunch of spell assets that cost 3 or more, then why not, right?
Yep. Water protection and denying existence, because those are just easy Mythos protection. And then Ritual Candles and Sword Cane because I wanted to target the hand slots, and those were like the easy 2 hand slot items. Some things you might notice are not here, which is the form of Arcane Initiate and David Renfield. I don't think that those make the issue on their own that Mystic is all the same, because those are just economy cards, right? They just give you resources or draw cards, so I felt that they were not worth banning. Yes, Arcane Initiate helps you find your spell assets, but is that a problem with Arcane Initiate, or is that a problem with the spell assets always being there? Additionally, we talked about it, Spectral Razor and Read the Signs. The reason why those didn't make the ban list is just because they are just great cards. Like it would be like us being like, okay, we have to, you're playing Guardian, but we can't play like toe-to-toe, right? Where, yes, that card, I put it in a lot of decks, right? You put Spectral Razor in a lot of decks, I'm sure, if you're watching. But I don't think anyone is out there going to be like, Spectral Razor is the issue, when I think it's just like an efficient card, right?
Yeah, I brought this up to you, and I went back on it too. I said, I do see this in a lot of decks, both this and Read the Signs, and they seem like easy includes because, to me, the problem with them is that you can put them in every Mystic deck and easily bump up your brain, so you just pass that test. Doesn't matter if you have a 2 in your base stat, a 3, a 4, doesn't really matter. But I eventually said, you know what, though? I actually want that in the Mystic card pool. I want the willpower spells to be kind of more event-like instead of them being an asset you slap down and that's the end.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's time. So what we did for this is we had like a card, or in one of the deck's case, an investigator. That was kind of like our inspiration for how to do this. So let's check out the first one now. All right, first card here is Astronomical Atlas. This is one of the decks that I brought here. And I know we were actually just talking about this while I was changing the camera layout. But I did mention that this actually won in our yearbook video of the least Mystic card. But I think for this video, that's actually a benefit. Because the reason why it's the least Mystic card, yes, I agree with past Justin. It's partly because of Norman Withers, but it's also because this explores something that the Mystic class doesn't do. So if the Mystic class gets more support for it, this suddenly might feel like a really cool Mystic card that you can use. We're not going to spend too long talking about these decks in detail. These are kind of like thought experiments. These are what ifs. So like we're not going to be like, here's the strategy, here's the combo. This is rather just like an example of what we want to be doing to kind of show them things that follow this ban list. And I hope to God that I didn't put something from the ban list on one of these decks. Because I went through and I was like, I think I'm good, but you know, something always slips through in one of these videos.
I looked at them. I think, unless you changed them since I last saw them, Justin.
It'd be so funny if I did. Like, I was just pranking you. This is actually an April Fool's Day video, and I'm just like, you see me start talking about, okay, so this is Shriveling. I got Right to Seeking. Yeah. All right.
You get this far in the video.
Yeah.
All right.
So, yeah, Astronomical Atlas wants you to play cards that, in my opinion, are skill cards, or like are able to take advantage of them in just like card draw. So I went like Deduction, Enraptured, Perception, Promise of Power. With my decks as well, I did try to focus on not just having the off class outnumber the main class. I still wanted to be Mystic to be the focus. So that's why we can see things that this is a lot of Seeker, because Luke is definitely very Seeker, so that was my approach here. But I wanted to celebrate as much as the Mystic class as I still could. And the big hurrah for this was Summon Servitor, which works really well with Astronomical Atlas because it gives you an extra action. It gives you some movement with how I have put the experience into this guy. But what it does is it basically just means that I want to be using my book as much as possible, boosting it with Death 13 and Arcane Studies to still get there, while still embracing that weird Mystic thing by using the Luke Robinson abilities, which is a very Mystic thing to use Drawn to the Flame and Read the Signs on, or even Burning the Midnight Oil on extra locations. I also purposely chose to not play, what is it called? The St. Hubert's Key. Well, I don't think that goes against the trend of this video to include St. Hubert's Key. I thought that by embracing not building around my brain, it would fit this video more. So I went with chemistry set because I love chemistry set. But chemistry set is also really nice because if we are planning on using, for example, deduction, perception, enraptured, promise of power, it means that we're going to be able to be high enough that we could potentially trigger the exactly by 4 pretty consistently. That's also what's really nice about using things like Premonition, which is a very good Mystic card because it ensures that I know I can commit something from my Astronomical Atlas to get me there. I chose not to run any allies besides Research Librarian because he could be a good sacrifice for the Summon Servitor to get the job done. But yeah, so this is actually like a Luke Robinson deck, very similar that I've built before in theory, which is just like using the book instead of the brain. Which I think the Mystic class does support because we see in Arcane Studies, and also the fact that Mystic has gotten so many 4 books that it's kind of like secondary to them. So that was kind of the philosophy for this one here.
Yeah. No notes. It's perfect.
Oh, I got a perfect.
No, I totally agree about the Arcane Studies thing. I think I've noticed that too, that you actually can't pay in Mystic for anything but willpower and intellect, right? Like the permanent that they get is Blood Pact, and it's just for Doom, right? You don't get to spend your money to improve your fist at all. And agility, sorry, you have no choice. You have no way to just pump that up. And all the other classes get a way of spending money to boost all the stats now, I believe.
Yep. And that's what I'm hoping with things like Cat Mask, which might be showing up later in this video, is a sign of things to come. Because, again, I want that 4-Fist Mystic so bad. All right. Your card, the first one you had, I think was a great choice, which was...
Yeah. I really like Dragon Pole, and I think it's a card that can fit into a lot of Mystics. Anyone that has 3 Fist, I think, at least is fine. I guess that's the maximum we get anyway, so... and it's sort of serving that purpose of... what is your backup plan for dealing damage? In this case, it is the only, pretty much the only way we get to deal damage, as you'll see in the next slide about who this is in. But I like having melee weapons, and in Mystic, it also makes sense because it's expanding your arcane slots. So it's, I don't know if there's a real arcane slot archetype other than just there's cards that support that, but I think there's a lot of cool things you can throw into your arcane slots that are not just the spell assets. So let's
before we get to your deck, I just want to echo your sentiment that I agree, and I actually think that Dragon Pole is better when you are not doing that, when you're actually doing the things that aren't the traditional things. I agree with that completely, but yeah, here's the deck.
All right, so we went with Diana, and part of this, as Justin said a minute ago, like these are thought experiments. They're not necessarily like run this deck exactly this way, but rather what can we get out of this concept? And for Diana, who only has 1 brain to begin with, we can kind of skirt around the idea of, do we need to use it at all? So we don't care about using that stat for much, but I don't have it as a cancel as Diana deck at all, where we still are going to be using cancels to churn through our deck and get some resources to play our cards. So we've got a Dragon Pole, and we can supplement the arcane slots that it gives us with Binder's Jar. This is basically purely a combat deck. I thought I would try something interesting with the arcane slots. From the new set, we've got Bulwark. So this is a asset that seals the Elder Sign or +1, and then you can resolve this keyword again to seal another token after you defeat an enemy. Well, good news, that's what we're doing with this deck. The reaction on it, when an enemy would attack and investigate your location, you can exhaust it, cancel the attack. I suppose you could then put this underneath Diana, but you probably don't want to do that. Cancel the attack, ready another asset you control. So I want to see if we can get something out of that. I know it's a Guardian card, and I'm not going to talk about this as a Guardian deck, but rather like, what are some things that you could ready that you might get some value out of? And I came with a couple of things. You might come up with some other better ones, because it is a little bit of an awkward card to figure out the timing on, like, what would you ready to then use again that round. But I thought maybe Empower Self would be interesting, so we could use all 3 of those, because they are going to use our 3 other good stats. And you could use them more than once during the round. So that's kind of maybe a good idea. The Summoned Hound also fills out one of our arcane slots, and you could use it to fight or investigate again.
Yep.
Maybe kind of cool. I don't think I have anything else here, but you know,
Living Ink also, you could do it
Yes.
on that as well. Yeah.
That's right. You could ready it and draw another symbol token or something. Yeah. So there's some synergy here. Maybe there's other stuff. The other thing that you could do, and the reason why we've got Bandolier in this deck, is her signature card, which not here. That's okay. That's the ceremonial dagger or something like that.
Yeah.
Lets you exhaust it to recur one of her events or skills that's underneath her. So you could use that twice in a round, which is maybe a cool idea.
Yeah. And then
the other thing I wanted to point out with the arcane slots is that with the Bandolier, you could put an enchanted blade in there, and that fills out maybe another spot. That's not really that great because you're not getting anything extra from the dragon pull then, but maybe the enchanted blade does more damage sometimes because you can spend extra charges.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something there maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you can see on like the other stuff, it's just like cancels and just good stuff. And this is also why I think Spectral Razor was okay to not ban, because you look at this deck and you're not like, oh, this is a Spectral Razor deck. You look at this deck and you're like, Spectral Razor is there to help me deal damage, you know? Which is exactly what it is for a card.
Yeah. And I also thought it was fun to go through and look at the other kinds of cancels that were, or ignores in the card pool that were not just the wards and denies that seem like auto includes in Diana. So yeah, a couple of them are coming from Guardian, but that's okay. It gets the job done. I think a Mystic deck that doesn't rely on being purely Mystic is still a good version of something that's not the same 15 to 20 cards in every deck. So
I agree 100%. 100%. Just because you're not, just because you're relying on your using your other half doesn't mean you're not also taking advantage of your Mystic half. All right. My second card was El Rubash, because Doom. I think Doom is a very a good thing that you actually don't need to use any spell assets for, and it's a very Mystic deck without using the traditional Mystic cards. So, of course, I went with Marie Lambeau. And this deck, actually, you don't know this, Daniel, but everyone who has watched Mystic Week, this is actually very similar to the Bryn deck that Bryn built for the random challenge, because Bryn rolled Marie and built a deck, and it was actually pretty impressive. He was full combat, but I went a little bit more flex because I have the dowsing rods here. As we talked about, people didn't really like them, but I think the community has now come to terms with the fact that dowsing rod is actually pretty playable. And it becomes even more playable when you, have Sin Eater and El Rubash to take advantage of things. However, one thing that absolutely blew my mind and was kind of what gave me more hope for this video, not that I was thinking it was going to be a bad video, but I was like, oh, there is a lot that we could talk about, was seeing Bryn use Abyssal Tome and Cat Mask. This thing just filling up every turn is kind of crazy. Like, it's kind of crazy. So just being able to, like, use all those things, and then you, like, empty it, do it again with Sin Eater, like, it's a very, very powerful gameplay loop. And as you can see, this deck is very Mystic. I even have Blinding Light, which I actually think is a really legitimate kill spell that people should be using this for its damage mode. The evade is nice, but also just, like, being able to, like, poke down an enemy is really good. Another thing that's also very beneficial, if you're not using spell slots, Explosive Ward is just like damage, right? It's just one of those things that if you're not usually chained to the traditional Mystic stuff, you're able to take advantage of it in other ways. And while Marie does still feel very much like a Mystic Investigator due to her deck building, like Mono Mystic, there are some cool things that you can use in the spell, and one of them that I saw was Cosmic Revelation. Just having that as a nice option is a really nice thing for Marie Lambeau to have. But what I really enjoyed for the splash was finding, like, the End of the Road and Long Shot to help make her Abyssal Tome better. But also the End of the Road is just because it's like some action compression that she's able to use to help use Sin Eater to her advantage, and also solve some of the issues where Mystics are a little bit tighter on the economy and action side of things.
Yeah, I was counting. I was like, there's too many off-class cards, Justin. And, oh, yeah, Cosmic Revelation is a spell.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, okay. It's a new card, so...
Yeah, it's a little bit sneaky.
For her. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it.
And then also the thing that I found very compelling while doing this deck, and also why I really enjoyed finding Cosmic Revelation, and I was like, aha, was yes, I'm not really going as hard on Marie Lambeau's ability as people would expect, because a lot of people, they're like, oh, you could just like play your spell asset and get there. But I think ultimately that might lead to the things we were talking about earlier, and the blaming the issues of Mystic class all being the same versus the decisions that you make making it all be the same. Because playing a Blinding Light for free, Cosmic Revelation for free, Read the Signs for free, Voice of Ra for free, these are all really nice things to use for her abilities, and you don't need to rely on just the spell assets to get that done.
That's right. I mean, that is Agatha's ability is kind of like that. It's an extra spell you could play at the end of your turn. This is, I don't know. I mean, it's almost better because it's a little bit more free, I guess. Which when you can do it, but spell events are spells.
Yep. So as you can see, this is a Flex Marie as well, which I think is a very nice showcase here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and we have one deck left, and this was the card.
Yeah. So the idea here was, could I come up with... I spent this whole video talking about how, man, there's just too many 5-brain mystics, and that leads to bad design space. So this is a challenge, was like, can I do something that is not just ignoring that number, but also ignoring that number for the purposes of spell assets? So let's take a look at Gloria's deck here. All right, so we're leaning into using... okay, right, another thing I said earlier was something you need to be able to do is progress the game using your stats, right? And not just willpower. So we did put St. Hubert's Key in here, not just for the willpower, but for the intellect boost as well. And Alyssa Graham, because you just kind of do that in Gloria. Did you know, by the way, there's like only 6 cards that trigger Gloria's ability in the whole card pool?
Yeah, we actually talked about this in the thing. She's getting mandied.
Yeah.
She's getting locked up.
I mean, it's weird, but I mean, once she has like one of them, it's basically enough anyway. But
yeah.
Once you have Alyssa Graham, you're kind of good to go. But this means that you can spend your time walking around and just doing basic investigates, and that seems kind of boring. And yeah, it is. But here's the fun part about having a Rogue Splash: is you can get extra actions, so you fix the Mystic problem of not having enough actions to do things, or relying on your spells to get the action compression done. So using Blur to evade something using your willpower. Hey, evade wasn't on our ban list, right? So that one's okay. And then you can get a couple extra actions, which could be to, move away or investigate a few more times. That's kind of cool. And yeah, quick thinking is there for that too. We can get a bunch of money through Watch This and Bank Job. So that kind of like scratch that itch for me. Like, let's not use the number, but let's use it for things that are not just the spell assets that are the clue and damage ones. Okay, then I thought it was kind of fun since we had... Oh, by the way, Whispers of Doom I think is a really good card, and it's like a Spectral Razor alternative if you are getting sick of that card. It's kind of better in some ways, but also more expensive and maybe harder to pull off. But we've got a really good number, so why not use it at least for something? Oh, right. So since I picked Rogue as my off class, which I'm sure is not the popular pick for most Glorias, I decided to lean into Friends in Low Places a bit and write Augury for our search. So I gave it prompt so it's fast, but you can search for auguries, which it turns out are a lot of Mystic cards. All the things that Gloria cares about, the Farsights, the Parallel Fates, Premonition, her signature, which isn't here, the new signature that is, what is it, Psychic Sensitivity or something? She gets 3 of those. And they have a lot of icons on them. Honestly, you could throw the Astronomical Atlas in here too, and it would be a rockin' deck. So, yeah, a lot of card draw, a lot of economy, and you don't need to just rely on spells. So it seems like a fun time. I think there's other things you can do here too. I didn't have XP to put the Eye of whatever it is into... How do you pronounce that?
G-Money we'll call it.
You could put that in here. I didn't have a place for it really. I mean, but we kind of were shying away from the +1 willpower cards anyway. Yeah, that's kind of it. Like it's a fairly simple deck, and I think you could do other things with it too. But the whole idea was, let's fix the action compression problem in a different way by getting
Yeah.
more actions.
And I think this deck's great too, and I like a lot of the things that the philosophy behind it I think really comes across for this video. And for people who might be watching this and being like, yeah, but this doesn't feel like a Mystic deck, like I think that's a thing where you might need to look inward and ask why that is, because this is Mystic cards. They're doing Mystic things. Like, this deck is mostly Mystic, right? So it still is a Mystic deck, even if it's not using its brain to use clue spells. It's using it for blur, and it's using its book to get clues.
I forgot to mention, Enraptured is in here to add a bunch of charges onto blur.
Yes, which seems really sick. Yeah, to just like go action crazy. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I actually, so I was kind of like trying to pay attention. I think the notable ones that were used multiple times were Scroll of Secrets. I used a level 0 version. Card's just good. Enraptured. And then Premonition also was doubled, but I think that's just because it's a simple card. And then obviously Read the Signs in Spectral Razor, but I still stand by that not being an issue. That's just, I think
it's fine too.
Yeah,
Enraptured also is kind of the new shiny card for us, and we know it's really good.
Yes, yeah.
But it also makes sense for these builds, right? You were trying to build around skills. You mentioned before how it's easy to lean into the book side of Mystic, and Enraptured helps with that.
Mm-hmm.
I had to add Scroll of Secrets in because of Gloria. It wasn't necessarily because of the card draw, right? So we at least have the Mystic version.
Yeah.
I think you had just the level 0 version.
Yes, yes. And what I also really like about Enraptured in this is that the Scroll of Secrets can be refilled if you haven't hit your blur yet. So you can just like keep using some Mythos mitigation because of that.
But honestly, I think the encounter deck manipulation and the augury, trait here is very Mystic.
100%.
It doesn't have a ton of support, but I think it's getting more, and it's a worthy way of playing the game. So.
Yeah, yeah. And also, because you can only go up to what level for rogue cards? Is it 2?
1.
1, yeah.
1.
So yeah, 1. Because I was going to say, if, for example, another thing you could do, I was thinking this we're doing, instead of doing prompt, if you did clever, that works really well with foresight, where you could like find foresight and then be like, I'm going to play this next card for free.
That is clever.
Yeah, so it's like, well, it is clever too, yeah. but that's where I think, like how we, going back to earlier in the video, actually, you know what? Hold on 1 second. All right, we're back. So whenever we were talking earlier about a big reason why, for example, Travis loves that Mystic Splash, it's because it's powerful. But I don't think that should be like having the Mystic be able to rely on their splash is a very big thing for making your Mystics not feel Mystics. So that's a big reason why Dexter is one of the most people speak most positive about as a Mystic, because he feels like a roguey Mystic, and like he explores it in a way that's very cool and interesting. So it's like one of those things that I think is very, very cool for the Mystic class. And that kind of goes for the bottom point, where the exploration is still very much possible. How much do you want to lean on your off class to potentially find something new in the investigators that actually have an off class?
There's a lot of synergy between Mystic and other classes, especially Guardian, I think. Seeker, also. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure about the other two as much, but certainly those two.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to... Yeah,
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
One thing I wanted to talk about also, I know we've seen all the decks, was there anything that you felt when you were building them that you were actually missing? For me, the answer was like, maybe not. Certainly the Dragonpole deck could have had some other stuff, Gride Seeking or whatever, could have just easily slid in, but it wasn't necessary. I don't know about you, but I know that in the past you didn't have this problem, but I've always had the problem of trying to cut out cards from my deck, where I start with 40 or 50. I'm like, oh my God, how do I get this down to the right size? And I had that problem even with the ban list.
That's
there
great,
were more things I wanted to put into that Gloria deck that you saw, that it was like a 1 copy of Parallel Fates or something. Like, that could have been 2.
Yeah.
I just had to cut things. So there's so much that's in the Mystic class that you don't need to start with the 15 or 20 things you always put in. You can start with all kinds of other toys and still fill out a deck pretty easily.
I think the only thing I was missing is I would have loved a divination in that Luke deck. But not because it's a Mystic spell asset, but because it's very good with Astronomical Atlas, and then that would have allowed me to explore Ghastly Possession in addition to the Enraptured. So, like, yeah. But other than that, no, I was not feeling like I was missing anything.
It's like the good kind of synergy you want with those cards, right? Because it made sense with the rest of your deck, not because you just might as well put it in.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, 100%. So hopefully today we've kind of showed you that while the Mystic class has a lot of staples, others do too. So that shouldn't be a knock against the Mystic class that you always want to play like Spectral Razor, because if you're always playing X card in another class, maybe give Mystic a little bit of a pass. But I think the thing that we talked about the most was that the spell suites, and then also just like the release for it, has eaten up so much of Mystic's class identity, like because of those things. You know, it's just like, I think that is the main reason why we saw so much of this sentiment, and why we see so much of this sentiment.
I know you have the future of the class or something in another video, so we won't hit on it here, but I think that this kind of thing can be improved upon. Like, I spent some time in the video also saying, man, I wish they had just had a different design philosophy from the beginning, but there's a few things that I think they can do to alleviate this problem, and they're starting to do it, but some of it's on us to be not expecting those cards to work the same way as the ones we're so used to.
Yep, and I think they're already signposting it by being like, here is level 0 Mystic assets, but we ain't giving you experienced versions. You got to find other ways to do that thing as you scale up, which I think is really cool.
Honestly, I like that about Dragon Pole too, right? That card allows you to put experience into other things instead. The problem is just, I think, things like Arcane Research and Down the Rabbit Hole incentivize you to have cards that are good at level 0, but then upgrade into other things, and then you don't spend any XP for them.
Yes, which is again, I think, another big issue. Like Down the Rabbit Hole and Arcane Research weren't in those decks because why would they be when they're basically like theory decks? But like that is another huge issue. So yeah, but yeah. That is the De-Mystic-fying the Mystic class. I hope you all enjoyed this. Thank you, Daniel, for joining me. When I got this idea, I knew you would be perfect for it. So, and I think you were. I think you were. The decks you made were great, and you actually had me thinking a lot too, because I never realized how closed off the Mystic investigators were until Diana after Agnes. It's kind of crazy. All right. Well, thanks so much for watching, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this video. And I want to thank you, all of our patrons. Give a quick shout out to all of you and also everyone watching at home. You guys all rock. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Have a good one. Enjoy the end of Mystic Week tomorrow. And as always, a GG's.